Welcome back. American-Israeli relations remain frosty under the Obama administration, and with the re-election of Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, can't expect those relations to repair anytime soon. Our own John Bogman spent a few minutes with former Deputy National Security Advisor Elliot Abrams for his take on what's next between these two allies.
Allison, we want to congratulate the Israeli people for the democratic process for the election that they just engaged in with all the parties that engage in that election. As you know now, the hard work of coalition building begins. Sometimes that takes a couple of weeks, and we're going to give space to the formation of that coalition government, and we're not going to weigh in one way or another except to say that the United States and Israel have a historic and close relationship, and that will continue going forward.
Well, David Simas there, the White House Director of Political Strategy, refusing to offer up the White House's congratulations to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after he won in his victory this week in a pretty resounding way. And joining me right now to go in depth on this is Elliot Abrams, a former Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush. Elliot, good to see you again. Now, we have this situation where we have a stated difference between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the goals of this administration when it comes to Middle East peace. Have we ever seen a rift this explicit and this deep before?
It's not a personal rift this bad. I mean, there have been policy differences from Suez under Eisenhower and other policy differences, even including under George W. Bush. But this personal invective, this level of dislike by two guys who've actually met a lot, know each other pretty well, and really don't like each other, I think is new.
Yeah, the UN also said today that it was going to try, and I don't know exactly what they said, but try to correct Benjamin Netanyahu on this policy. What does this mean for Israel and the global community, though?
Most countries, certainly in Europe, were rooting for him to lose. You know, they wanted Isaac Herzog, the opposition, to be the new government of Israel. Certainly in Europe and obviously in Washington. Not so clear in the Arab states, by the way, because they're mostly concerned about Iran,
right,
where Netanyahu's been very tough. I think this is going to make it hard for Israel in most of the European capitals and at the United Nations.
And Netanyahu must have known this when he made that proclamation. Does he not care? But does he understand maybe this is the road that they have to take at this point?
Well, I think part of this is, you know, it's an election campaign. All the polls suggested he was losing. And so he did what politicians do. He said a lot of things in order to win. I think it's been a little bit overinterpreted. That is, he didn't say, I'm against a Palestinian state forever until the end of time, never. He said, anybody who's in favor of doing that today is making a big mistake, and it's not going to happen on my watch. I don't think very many Israelis thought it was going to happen on his watch. Anyway, I don't know anybody who's particularly optimistic about the idea of concluding an Israeli-Palestinian peace in the next couple of years. I think you'll see him walk that back a little bit. You'll have government spokesmen explain, that he didn't say never. He was just being practical about how today it's not possible.
Sure, it's what a lot of folks have thought, but saying it in a very public way is something different. Perhaps something like the dog catching the car in this case?
Yeah, I mean, he can always give the old Jerry Brown line when asked about campaign promises given days before. I remember Jerry Brown saying, well, that was then and this is now.
Yeah, the realities of elections and actually running the country are two different things sometimes. I want to ask you about something that was said on Morning Joe with Mika Brzezinski, asking GOP conference chair Cathy Morris Rogers on whether the GOP played a role in Netanyahu's victory. Let's take a listen.
Well, I think that this was an important election. Obviously, it was great to have Benjamin Netanyahu come visit. He made it very clear that it wasn't political, that he just wanted to talk to America, talk to Congress. I thought it was an important message that he gave us about the United States-Israel relationship and the prospect of Iran having a nuclear weapon. And that has long been a position that we have shared, that we do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, I think most Republicans were obviously rooting for him, as most Democrats were probably rooting against him. What's really new here is this. It used to be the case for decades that an Israeli prime minister who was thought to be unable to handle Washington well was probably doomed. That was a critical thing to be able to do. In this case, it seems to have helped Netanyahu. That speech in Congress seems to have helped him. And I think the only explanation you can give is so many Israelis think that President Obama is not a friend of Israel, that they actually like it when Netanyahu stands up to him and seems to be fighting him.
Yeah, I read an article today that was interviewing voters after they came out of the polls, and many said that they planned on voting for Herzog right up until the last minute, and they said they were liking the fact that Netanyahu stood up specifically to Obama, so that clearly played a role here in his win. Were you surprised, or is this just, you know, elections in Israel are not that much different than elections here in the United States, where the experts don't really know what's going to happen right before the election takes place?
You know, it's so bizarre. The polls were wrong. Not only the polls last week, the exit polls seemed to be wrong. But I would say one thing about the outcome. There wasn't any significant move to the left or to the right. There was movement within the two blocs, so that people who were going to vote for lesser parties, small parties, ended up on the left voting for Labor, on the right voting for Netanyahu. They coalesced around him in an effort to win the election and get him to be prime minister again. So it isn't as if there's a new Israel that's changed so much. The major older parties won this election.
All right, so not a lot changing underneath the surface of everything. More made about this election than the actual real impact you expect to see here in terms of the relationship between Israel and the United States?
I hope that's true. I hope the Obama administration and Netanyahu figure out ways to work together much better. You know, they've got almost 2 years to go together.
Yeah, that's a long time.
They've got to make it work.
They do. All right, well, Elliot Abrams, thank you so much for joining us today. Always great to get your insight on issues in the Middle East, specifically dealing with Israel and Israeli-U.S. relations.
And our thanks to both John Bogman and Elliot Abrams. Miranda, very interesting to listen to the assessment of Elliot Abrams saying that the perception in Israel that Prime Minister Netanyahu stands up to President Obama may have helped carry the day for the Prime Minister against all odds.
Interesting insight. We haven't heard that from anybody else, and we've talked to quite a few experts.
And especially what he also said about, in my words, the melting away of the coalitions, that people said, okay, they're going to go back with Likud or they're going to be with Labor instead of seeing the splinters. And of course, that results in Likud with a majority of 30 seats as the Knesset prepares to reconvene and Prime Minister Netanyahu prepares for a
I think it was the two-state. I think it was him changing his mind on being okay with the Palestinian state. I think that's what really did it for Netanyahu.
Well, the idea is attract the votes, and he did so, and we'll see what it means to the future. In the immediate future, our good friend Stephen J.J. Weissman will be here to talk about internet usage, so to speak.